Welcome back to Night Train to Mondo Cine in part 5 of our series on Carlos Villarías, the Spanish Dracula. Carlos Villarías left Hollywood in 1942 to resume working in Mexico, where he had last worked in March 1937. From 1942 to 1948, Villarías appeared in 27 films. Unlike his previous visit, this time he was assigned strictly supporting roles, playing doctors, lawyers, military officers, businessmen, ranchers, butlers, etc. Between the beginning of September and the end of December 1942, Carlos Villarías made 4 films. Espionaje en el Golfo is a rather good spy film with decent production values and location shooting, a solid cast, a fair amount of action, and a rousing propaganda conclusion. Villarías is 4th billed and plays Don Pepe González, a newspaper editor. Canto a las Américas, a musical, reunited Villarías with his fellow Spaniards Ramón Pereira and Manuel Noriega. He has one substantial scene and one brief appearance as a friendly bank manager who tries to convince Pereira not to ruin his life by committing fraud. In Que Hombre Tan Simpático, Carlos Villarías was reunited with Fernando Soler, with whom he'd appeared in Verbena Trágica and Los Hijos Mandan in Hollywood. Villarías, wearing one of the worst fake mustaches ever seen, has a good supporting role as the violently possessive uncle of Gloria Maríne's character. In one scene, Villarías complains that his niece is being stolen away by un canalla, o un vampiro, almost certainly an in-joke referencing his most famous screen role, Count Dracula. His final 1942 film was El Padre Morelos. Villarías plays a rich hacendado and slave owner who opposes Morelos and his concern for the poor and downtrodden of Spain's colony, Mexico. In 1943, Villarías acted in 3 films, the first of which was El Hombre de la Máscara de Hierro. This went into production in April with the 3rd billed Villarías as Colbert, a minister to the French king. However, Villarías was suddenly notified that his work permit had expired. Since he began working in Mexico in September 1942, a 6-month work permit should have expired at the beginning of March 1943, but he apparently wasn't notified he had to leave until May, or perhaps he was and had gotten an extension. In any case, he was forced to leave the country, arriving in El Paso, Texas on the 28th of May 1943. Because his character appeared in a significant number of scenes, he couldn't be replaced unless numerous expensive retakes were done, so the cast and crew went on hiatus. Villarías cooled his heels in El Paso for several weeks, finally returning to Mexico on the 19th of June to finish the picture. Villarías is notably absent in the film's finale, which takes place at the Notre Dame Cathedral, but it's unclear if he was actually intended to be in this sequence or not. Overall, he has a very substantial role in the film. His second film of the year was Hotel de Verano, remembered today as the official feature film debut of Tintin, who has a 5-minute guest appearance in this romantic comedy with music. Carlos Villarías appears in the first scene of the film as the butler to wealthy and eccentric Enrique Herrera. Although Villarías is primarily a straight man for Herrera, the scene is amusing enough. He makes a very brief appearance a few minutes later, then vanishes for the rest of the movie. His final acting work in 1943 began in October. The film was Tribunal de Justicia, a fictionalized version of the Lindbergh kidnapping case and trial, directed by Alejandro Galindo. "1944 was the busiest year of the Mexican film career of Carlos Villarías. He had supporting parts of various sizes in 8 films. In Cuando Escuches Este Vals, a spy melodrama, the unbilled Carlos Villarías has 2 scenes as a Mexican army general. As the film opens, he's presiding over a military graduation ceremony, and he makes one brief appearance later. Villarías appeared in Gran Hotel, a comedy featuring Mexico's top comic actor Cantinflas. Although he was billed 11th in the cast list, Villarías has a significant role as an exasperated nightclub manager in a 15-minute segment of the film. About 2 weeks later, he worked on La Hija del Regimiento, an adaptation of Donizetti's opera. He plays the mayor of a small European town and has 2 brief scenes in the early part of the movie. Carlos Villarías had small roles in 2 mystery films starring magician detective Fu Manchu, otherwise known as David T. Bamberg. In Asesinato en los Estudios, Villarías is a doctor, while in El Museo del Crimen, he was cast as a police detective. El Rey se divierte deals with a European king, played by Fernando Soler, who relocates to Mexico during World War II. A bearded and mustachioed Carlos Villarías has a supporting role as a general. La Barraca, based on a novel by Vicente Blasco Ibáñez, was set in Spain, and although star Domingo Soler was Mexican, many of the other cast members, including Carlos Villarías, were Spaniards. Villarías plays the proprietor of a local tavern. He was then reunited with director-star Miguel Contreras Torres for the period ranchera Rancho de Mis Recuerdos. Villarías was cast as a kindly ranch owner, a role he had played before and would play again. In January and February 1945, Carlos Villarías appeared in 2 films directed by Juan J. Ortega at the Azteca Studios. He has a good supporting role as a faithful servant in the melodrama La Mujer Legítima, but only a very small part in La Casa de la Zorra, which starred famed actor Virginia Fabregas, as well as Ricardo Montalban and Isabella Corona. Villarías has a blink-and-you'll-miss-it part of an ambassador at a large party, with only a few lines of dialogue. Villarías played yet another hacendado in the ranchera melodrama Rayando el Sol, which went into production in June in the state of Morelos. The director was Roberto Gavaldon, who would use Villarías again in 1946. Carlos Villarías was cast as Christ's disciple St. Peter, or San Pedro, in 2 religious films made by director Miguel Contreras Torres in November and December 1945, Maria Magdalena and Reina de Reinas. Los Siete Niños de Écija and El Secreto de Juan Palomo started shooting at the Clase Studios in May 1946. Although Carlos Villarías is credited on screen on both Los Siete Niños de Écija and the sequel, El Secreto de Juan Palomo, he does not appear in the second film. The credits for both movies are identical, so some performers who are only in the first film are credited on the second as well, and vice versa. The films were based on a 19th century Spanish novel about a real-life group of bandits and freedom fighters, and were set in and around Écija, a town in the region of Andalusia. Although many Spanish émigrés worked on these films, Carlos Villarías and Florencio Castelló may have been the only natives of Andalusia in the cast. Villarías plays the mayoral, or administrator of the estate, of the film's villain, the Marqués de Guadalcanal. However, Villarías is in league with the heroes, the titular Siete Niños, and assists them in carrying out a robbery. He appears prominently in several scenes in the first section of the film, then vanishes. La Otra, a film noir drama directed by Roberto Gavaldón and starring Dolores del Rio, went into production at the Churubusco Studios in May 1946. Villarías has a brief role as a lawyer in this picture, which is now recognized as a classic of cine mexicano. Gavaldón hired Villarías again in early 1947 for the drama La Diosa Arrodillada, starring three of Mexican cinema's top stars, Arturo de Cordova, Maria Felix, and Charito Granados. Villarías plays a judge in the climactic scenes. In June 1947, Carlos Villarías appeared in his final fantasy film, Una Aventura en la Noche. This is a variation on the Phantom Hitchhiker urban legend and stars Luis Aguilar and Miroslava. Villarías plays a scientist who revived his two daughters after they were killed in an accident, but they now exist in a strange state somewhere between life and death. Unlike his earlier mad scientist parts in El Rostro Pálido and El Superloco, this time Villarías is a sympathetic character, albeit in a much smaller part. In 1948, the last year Villarías worked in Mexico, he appeared in 3 films. In Zorrina, La Mujer Maldita, he was cast as yet another military officer, and in the period melodrama Lola Casanova, he has a brief role as a businessman. The final Mexican film of Carlos Villarías, Comisario en Turno, began filming in October 1948 at the Azteca facility. A comedy drama about the various people who encounter a magistrate, played by Domingo Soler, in a Mexican police station during his shift, the film has a large cast. Villarías was listed 16th out of 33 cast members, but has a decent role as a Good Samaritan who serves as a witness to a clash between a sad old lady and a street urchin. The sad old lady turns out to be a swindler. Soler originally suspects Villarías of being her accomplice, but he is proved innocent. Also in the cast was Manuel Noriega in his last collaboration with Villarías, although they don't share any scenes. This was more than 30 years after their first encounter in New York. After making Comisario en Turno, Villarías returned to Spain, where he would make his final 3 film appearances. This period of his career will be covered in the next episode of Night Train to Mondo Cine. Thanks for watching.